Debbie. Thanks very much for joining us. We're really keen to speak to you and learn more about your experience for non-exec roles and a little bit more about Aspen People. So for the people watching, would you mind letting us know a little bit about yourself and the types of positions that Aspen People generally recruit for?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Emma. So we're a executive search firm, and our focus is really on that leadership space. So we will tend to recruit mostly kind of director, chief exec, and board roles. Um, and we kind of work right across the public and third sectors. So everything from sort of charities, housing associations, NDPBs, local government, NHS, education, all of that kind of stuff. We'll recruit, and it's in that kind of leadership space. In terms of me, I've been with the business for 7 years, 7 years next month actually, and I've had a number of non-exec roles myself. I
Brilliant.
currently sit on the board of the Scottish Refugee Council. Been on there for about, I think that's coming up for 3 years actually. And I've been the chair of a small charity as well, and been involved in lots of different types of organisations at board level. Some very small organisations and some quite big ones, and also sit on the board at Aspen.
Oh, fantastic. No, that's great to know. And I remember when I spoke to you before, you said that speaking about non-exec director posts was probably one of your favourite subjects. So you're a fantastic person to speak to. But for those that maybe have heard of non-exec NED roles as they're called for short, could you explain maybe to people that maybe aren't sure what they are, what's the sort of purpose of them?
Yeah, so I mean, it's absolutely my favourite subject, and it's my favourite thing, or one of my favourite things really to recruit, because I think, well, number one, it's really important for organisations to have access to people that they wouldn't normally work with in terms of their own structure. And being on a board is it's a very strategic role. There should be a clear line between how the operation of that organisation works and how the board works. And I always think of the board as a kind of critical friend. You know, you're there to guide, critique and advise essentially, and it's a legal responsibility. And I would advise anyone who's considering any kind of non-exec role to really make sure they understand what they're signing up for.
Okay,
It's a legal responsibility, and you can get that kind of information on the Oscar website or the SCVO website. Um,
brilliant.
and I think what else is really important is that if you really clear about why you want to do it, and what you want to get out of it, and it's the best kind of board appointments work when there's a kind of two-way thing, that you're getting access to something yourself and the organisation's getting access to you. And it's one of the best things I've ever done, and I'd thoroughly recommend it.
Oh, brilliant. And what would you say people tend to, is there, as an organization who's looking for somebody to, be the next NED within their company, is there a particular skill set that they look for, or does it depend on the type of opportunity?
It really depends on the organisation and how that's made up. So normally, there are kind of key roles that you would have. So you'd always have a chair, sometimes a vice chair, a treasurer, which is probably one of the most sought after roles on a board. And there's a number of other things, but those are kind of the main kind of post holder, office bearer type roles. Um, and your skill set really depends on what that organisation is. But what I
Okay.
would say is, because even though it's a strategic role, you don't have to necessarily come from that background. I think it's really important to encourage people who maybe don't see themselves um, as potential board members to step up and think, actually, I have to find out more about this, because everyone's got something to offer. And, there are kind of shortages, if you like, in different types of board members. For example, young people joining boards is one of the best things I think can really happen, but there's a lot less opportunity for that,
Yeah.
which is a real shame. And I really hate saying young trustees, because they're just trustees, but there's a way of trying to define that, I guess. And I think it's important that diversity on a board, we might come to that a little bit later on, but what you're talking about is making that board diverse enough that
Okay.
actually there's a range of backgrounds and a range of skills, a diversity of thought on there that are going to lead to the best governance.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely, I completely agree. And what about, you've said there, it depends on the organisation,
Yeah.
it depends on what they're looking for, which is great. Is there any particular qualifications or experience an organisation would expect someone to have as a minimum, or, again, is it again dependent on the role?
Yeah, so I think qualifications probably not, unless they're looking for a qualified accountant to be the treasurer. That's probably the most obvious one.
Yeah,
Quite often boards will have someone with legal background, so you imagine it'd be a qualified lawyer. But not really. I think what's important, and I guess what I'm looking for when I'm recruiting for these roles is someone where there's a couple of things, a real connection to that organisation. Why do you want to be a board member of this place? Not
okay,
why do you want to be a board member at all, especially in the third sector and some of the kind of public sector stuff. There's a real that values match, that piece of well, why, what's your motivation behind doing it.
okay,
And if it's for self-development, that's completely fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But there needs to be some sort of reason that you want to be involved with that particular organisation. And the third sector in particular is obviously very values driven, and they're there for most organisations are there for specific causes. And I've done it myself. You're at a board meeting, you're not finishing till late on a kind of rainy December night, and you're walking to the train station thinking, why am I doing this? So there needs to be a reason that you're doing that
yeah,
because it's free as well. You're giving your time and expertise for free.
yeah.
In that sector. In the private sector, there would be paid roles, but in the charity sector, you're doing it because you want to. So there needs to be something that motivates you to do that, in my experience.
Yeah, exactly. And probably understand in some way the service users, why people are using that particular type of charity or the need. And I've worked with before with people that have maybe leaned on a certain type of charity before, and that's one of their motivations, like you said, for joining it, or at least have knowledge about it. Would you say there's a difference between the NED roles for the charities in the third sector versus corporate
Yeah, I mean, corporate,
opportunities?
yeah, because corporate will be probably, I mean, again, it depends because they might need a certain background or a certain skill set, but it's very much that'll be very much driven, business driven and driven by certain things. So I imagine they'll be very defined about what they need. And when a space comes up, it'll be there'll be real kind of scrutiny around why, what do they need, what do they want. So I imagine most of the time in the private sector, they're recruiting a particular type of person or someone with particular skill set, as they would in the third sector. But I think the third sector's got that real kind of values piece behind it, which makes it
Yeah.
really interesting.
No, absolutely. And what would you say the kind of this the typical recruitment process? So I've noticed you guys have a few opportunities just now, and and some of them are like you said, not on a paid basis, but
Yeah.
is that what would you say? How does the recruitment process look like that? Do you guys just treat it as you're recruiting for a normal role, and it's people should expect to prepare for interviews and their CVs and things like that in the same way?
Um, Well, yes and no. I mean, I think when you're recruiting in the third sector for these roles, it's they're not paid roles, but at the
Yeah.
same time they're really important roles. Um, and there was a kind of historical thing where people would tap their friends on the shoulder, or someone would know someone and they'd join the board. But the professionalization of recruiting these roles, I've noticed a lot in the last few years. Um, these people have, like I said, legal responsibility for running your organization. I just think about that.
Yeah.
In another sector, that wouldn't be a not unpaid job. It's a big, it's quite a lot to take on. Um, and I think there's something really important about that and not forgetting that. The process is I can only speak for our process, of course. And we go through a search process. We are an executive search firm, so we'll take a brief from someone and then go and look for people that match that,
Yeah.
and maybe throw a left field candidate or two in there. And then there's a formal interview for sure. And for roles like the chair role, for instance, there'll probably be a couple of stages. But we try to keep it as informal as you can because it's not a paid job in
Yeah.
that space. So we kind of try to mix it up. But now it's definitely a much more, I've seen it right across the board, it's a much more professional approach. And actually 40% of our business last year was trustee recruitment.
Okay.
So it's quite a big, it's important to us, but it's also, I can see it being more and more important to a lot of our clients.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And would you say when you'd said right there at the beginning that there's a difference with NED positions where it's not the operational experience people are looking for, it's the strategic piece, and of
Yeah.
course you've placed an emphasis on it as a legal responsibility as well. How would you say somebody should approach, writing or positioning their CV in comparison to, another position that they would do for career reasons for their next opportunity? What would you say the main differences should be?
In their CV.
Yeah,
Um,
like what would you prefer to see?
so I think I would have, I mean, I've not written my own CV for a long time, but I would have a board CV that, which I actually do have for if I'm applying for board roles.
Yeah,
And that just emphasizes all of that stuff. So if you've got that experience, it's really important to make sure we see that kind of front and center if you're going for something else. And actually, as well, as a bit of an aside, I always think people with board experience make the most interesting candidates, and even in
okay.
different sectors. I kind of think if you come down to two candidates at the end, both, really level, really great experience, um, and one of them has got good board experience, they always stand out because it makes an employer think, well, there's more to them.
Yeah,
They're motivated, they're giving their time or whatever. To work in a different way, and that showcases your strategic experience. But if you're applying to boards, it's not all about having the experience. A lot of people, you've got to be a first time board member at some
yeah,
point. And actually it's really important because what what I want to see in the sector is a kind of succession plan for, these boards to, because you wouldn't, no one's going to be on boards forever. So you want
yeah.
to make sure that less experienced people are coming into those board roles, being mentored by the really experienced folk, and then kind of taking that mantle over. So it's really, really important.
Perfect. No, and I was just about to say that how can someone compensate for the lack of board experience because somebody, you've got to have that experience to get it. But would you say there's a lot of organizations out there that are willing to, depending on someone's experience and I suppose passion about working for them, they're quite willing to give somebody that their first time board position?
Yeah, and some organisations actively encourage it because there's that kind of, I always think it's that fresh pair of eyes, that fresh thinking, and looking at things from a different angle. I mean, I've been on boards for about 10 years, and I really need to kind of look at myself and think, am I approaching this in the right way? Because I've done it before. So I
Okay.
think when you get someone in, I love when you get brand new board members, because there's a lot of questions that come from that which are really good, and the board should be scrutinised as well, let's be honest. So you have that kind of real fresh approach, and I would encourage anyone who's kind of maybe seen, what is this kind of dark art of being on a board, I'm not sure if I should do it or not, to just even ask if someone like me or someone in the organization that they've seen, or if they know someone that's done it, kind of find out a little bit more about that because it's really rewarding.
No, no, that's fantastic. And you'd mentioned earlier on about the diversity piece
Yeah.
about boards. Tell me then what are organisations trying to do? Like, and then you'd said as well, we talked about young people as well, because as a board, it is really important to be able to consider, different perspectives and requirements. So what would you say is happening now for the companies that are trying to, encourage that?
So diversity is probably one of the most important conversations we'll have when talking about a board. But the most important thing to me about that is that it's not a tick box exercise. It's
Yeah,
not a token piece. It's something that's it's really bedded in. And if we're looking people from certain backgrounds, then we need to know why that's important and why that's happening. And it's not a case of, well, we only have this type of person on the board, so get a couple of these people or it won't be a
makes it
successful
up, yeah.
process. Yeah. And actually what you want on that board is you want a real understanding of where, and all different voices, different backgrounds, different people coming together for that to make that one board up for the organisation. And it's important that different voices are there, or at least there's an opportunity out to those groups, those marginalised groups that might not get the chance. So the opportunity for the seat at the table should be distributed to everyone or as wide as you can. But what you don't really need is a kind of someone with a list just ticking it off, saying, well, that person's this age, that person's that from there, blah, blah. Because you can have a really different looking board, but if they all come from the same place, it can be quite a similar tone of voice. So that diversity of thought is really important as well. But it's not an easy thing to do. I mean, it's quite difficult. Even still, it's still quite difficult. But it's something that's worth putting the time and effort into.
Absolutely. And I think you've probably nailed it on the head by saying diversity of thought there as well, which is great. Would you say that the people would maybe have to accept that as their first NED position, or you ideally should think about doing a charitable or third sector non-paid role before you've even got the opportunity of gaining the paid positions for those that are thinking about building up their portfolio
I
in the future?
I don't think it's one or the other. I mean, I'm a big advocate of third sector boards. I think everyone should at least consider joining a third sector board at some point. But more and more people these days are kind of having this portfolio style career. And you get some of these really big board positions with NDPBs and in government and stuff like that. That are, well paid, they're really high profile. And for those roles, you want to have experience of being probably a chair or a senior trustee. You want some good experience behind you for those. Although they probably need people first-time trustees as well, so don't, kind of take yourself out of that. But I don't think it's a one or the other. I think actually both are really helpful. And I would say that if you're going for the paid stuff or the private sector stuff, you really need to understand that kind of that sector and what they need to do. So I would always encourage someone if they see someone advertising in any sector for a non-exec is to try and get a conversation with that person first, whether it's an agency or the organisation directly, and get a sense of what they actually need. Because you might be, even although you don't match what's on that job spec 100%, actually someone with a bit of that and a different style of thinking might be a really great place for them, sorry, really good place for them to end up. And I think with these roles you can be a little bit like that. You can kind of say, well, yeah, maybe have you thought about this, and then bring that into the mix. And I'm always a fan of a left field candidate anyway.
Oh, good. And I actually give that advice quite a lot to candidates that are approaching positions, is whether it's an agency or the employer directly, if you can speak to somebody within there just to understand what the challenges are at the moment and what I suppose that you're going in there to maybe help fix or help them grow and things like that. So I think that's even more important for these types of roles as well. Probably lastly, Debbie, would be how would somebody demonstrate, whether that's in an probably more in the interview, how do they demonstrate their strategic thinking and what should they be thinking about in the interview process?
So I think it comes down again to obviously your experience. So if you're a senior person in your kind of day job doing that, it's probably quite easy to get that over. But you can also be someone that's developing your strategic thinking.
Okay.
You could always be someone that's maybe taken a bit of a career break and, worked like that before. But strategic thinking doesn't mean you have to be the chief exec. And I think that's really important to say to people. You don't have to be the finance director or the chief exec of a company to think strategically or to get a board role. I think again for that diversity of thought, you don't want people that are only very senior. You want a mix. So I think in terms of the strategic positioning, you kind of want to think to yourself, right, what does that mean to me in my kind of everyday life? What do I do? And people's CVs are are really personal. It's quite an emotional thing for people to write their CVs or make any changes to them or do
Yeah.
anything. People don't like changing their CVs, and I get it, but I think you need to kind of, I always tell people to write their CVs and their covering letters for the job that they want. So it's like kind of thinking not something you did 5 years ago. That's probably not your greatest achievement now. It's
Yeah.
thinking, how did you get to that place, and what are you doing every day that actually isn't an operational thing. It's thinking bigger. And that word strategic, I think, can put people off sometimes
I
because
think
it's a
so.
bit like, well, I'm not strategic, I'm not this. And you're like,
Yeah.
well, actually, you are strategically thinking every day. You just don't have that banner or that title yet.
Yeah.
And those people are always really appealing when they apply. And if you can get that over, which is where the kind of magic of the cover letter comes in, I guess, and having that initial conversation can be quite useful.
No, absolutely. And I think that's great as well, because I think you're completely right. The cover letter is the opportunity for someone to get over their why and that personality about themselves that, sometimes the CP can't always achieve.
Yeah.
So no, that's great advice. Is there anything else that you would say to anybody, sitting right now thinking, oh, I have been thinking about doing this for a while. Is there any other advice you would give them?
Just do it. I mean, it's not that scary. And I always kind of find it quite surprising because we are dealing with, leaders and chief execs quite a lot, and still a lot of people think, oh well, and why would I join a board? What have I got to give? And it's oh, how could I do that? And there's so many reasons that everyone can do it or get involved. So my advice really is just do it, find out about it, and find the best place for you. You don't want to just jump into any of these roles because they are demanding time wise, and there's a lot of thought that goes into them as well. But yeah, just do it.
No, thank you. That's been really, really helpful. And I think you've really, I think, helped people feel a bit more confident about navigating through that. And I suppose the real purpose of what a NED role actually is. So it's been really, really insightful. So thank you for your time, Debbie.
No, it's my pleasure. Thanks, Emma.
Okay, well, thanks so much. Speak soon.
Giant red face.